President, I ask unanimous consent that I be able to speak for up to 15 minutes, Senator Marshall for up to 5 minutes, and Senator Menendez for up to 5 minutes before the scheduled roll call votes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to speak on two topics, Mr. President. First, inflation. President Biden's economic policies, unfortunately, have waterboarded the budgets of most Americans and most Louisianians. We see the official statistics, and the statistics are that inflation is going up 7%. And I understand that that's what the experts say, but most Americans and most Louisianians know that inflation is much worse, much worse. And I'm sure that's been the experience of the good people of Georgia as well. I mean, I did some calculations before I came down today. From December of 2020 to December of 2021, most recent numbers we have, gasoline is up 49.6%. In my state, in Louisiana, it costs Louisianians $27 more than it did last year to fill up the tank of a Chevy truck. That's every time they fill up the tank. Used cars and truck prices have increased by 37.3%. In New Orleans, for example, in my state, Mr. President, used car prices were up 38.2% through last September. We all have to eat, Mr. President. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs up 12.5%. New vehicles, if you can find one, up 11.8%. Household furniture, up 7.4%. Electricity, up 6.3% and headed higher. Clothes, 5.8%. Fruits and vegetables, 5%. Cereals and bakery products, 4.8%. And I could keep going. The truth is that most Americans are having to spend, on average, about $3,500 more per year because of President Biden's inflation. Now, to some people, that may not sound like much. That's a lot of money to the people in my state. An extra $3,500 out of the budget of most working Americans is a lot. You know, I wish it weren't so, but this inflation has been caused by the Biden administration's economic policies. Inflation is not complicated. It's too much money chasing too few goods. The President Biden's coronavirus bill was the tipping point. That's clear. Now, we all voted for a number of coronavirus bills, but the last coronavirus bill was way too expensive. It was unnecessary. There wasn't a coronavirus bill. The president said, oh, we got an emergency. We got an emergency. And then you read the bill and find out that the bill's got nothing to do with the coronavirus. And the money's going to be spent over like a 10-year period. It's not an emergency. the current inflation has characteristics I've not seen this, of both cost push and demand pull inflation. And it can be traced directly to the economic policies of the Biden administration. And the Biden administration keeps pushing. It keeps trying to stuff more diapers down the toilet. The Biden administration wants to throw another $5 trillion, not billion, not million, $1 trillion of gasoline on the fire and Build Back Better bill. And if we pass that, there'll be another $1 trillion. I mean, this administration spends money like it was gully dirt. I've never seen anything like it. And then we have inflation. We have all this liquidity, which leads to inflation, and the Biden administration will not accept responsibility. President Biden has blamed inflation. He blamed it first on COVID. Now, I'll admit COVID is spreading, but I don't see people walking around coughing inflation on each other. Then he blamed it, I think he blamed it on China for a while. Then President Biden blamed it on greedy corporations. I expect next he'll say that inflation originated in a bat. But the truth of the matter is it's not complicated. It originated with his spending policies. And it is just killing my people. It is killing them. And Mr. President, we have, as you know, we have a lot going on here in Washington. And a lot of issues in front of us that are important. Ukraine, for example. The president shortly is going to nominate a new member to our United States Supreme Court. We have a multitude of bills that we're considering. And all those are important. But inflation's important too. And it is hurting the American people. And it's hurting the least among us the most. Yes, we're seeing inflation in terms of services, but we're seeing inflation more in terms of goods. And low-income Americans, as you well know, spend proportionately more of their income on goods than they do on services. The president's policies, I regret to have to say, have administered a sucking chest wound on the budgets of the people of my state and the people of America, and it's got to stop. Let me say one more thing, Mr. President, if I could. I lost a good friend in Louisiana, and Louisiana lost a good friend last week, Mr. Clifford Smith. Clifford happened to be a civil engineer, but he was so much more. Clifford was born in New Orleans, but he lived his entire life in Terrebonne Parish. Terrebonne Parish in my state is one of our most southern parishes. It has been experiencing, for a variety of reasons, wetlands loss for decades after decades after decades. We were started experiencing wetland loss as soon as we levied the Mississippi River. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have levied it, because it has obviously created a lot of commerce in America and in Louisiana, but the river could no longer overflow and deposit the sediment, and the sediment has not been replenished, and the current sediment has sunk. And when your land sinks and the ocean rises, then you're going to have wetlands loss. Clifford Smith was one of the first Louisianians, if not the first, to talk about the need for coastal restoration in my state. Clifford Smith, throughout his career at T. Baker Smith, the name of his company, created jobs for thousands of the people in my state. He was on every board imaginable. When his church burned down in Houma, Clifford said, "I'll be responsible for raising the money and rebuild the church." It took him 5 years, and he did it. And Houma is not It's a wonderful place, but it's not a wealthy place. But Clifford did it. He had a lot of help, but Clifford was the quarterback. He was whip smart. He was visionary. He was wise. He was very charming. I remember I've known Clifford for 30 years plus. I remember when I first decided to run for office, I called Clifford and said, "Will you support me?" And because Clifford, everybody knew Clifford Smith. Everybody respected Clifford Smith. Everybody admired Clifford Smith. And I knew if I had his support in his area of my state, it would be critical. And he said, "Yeah, Kennedy, I'll support you." And I said, "Well, Clifford, you know the question that's coming next. I can't run a campaign without financial resources. Will you give me money?" He said, "No." I was shocked. This is my friend. He said, "I will not give you money." He said, "But I'll tell you what I will do, Kennedy. I will, since you've decided to run for office, I will buy you a gift certificate for a psychiatrist." Well, that was Clifford. What a poignant statement. Of course, he ended up supporting me financially. But he went on to give me advice and say, "You sure you want to do this? Politics is a rough business." I miss Clifford. I'm going to miss him. He's got a wonderful family, wonderful kids, wonderful grandkids, wonderful great-grandkids. Joanne, his wife, is just a lovely person. And I know that they will continue to spread the truths that were so important to Clifford Smith. But I went down to the funeral on Monday to say goodbye, but I wanted to say goodbye on the floor of the United States Senate and recognize my friend and a Louisiana favorite son, William Clifford Smith. We celebrate his life, but his loss, Louisiana weeps. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor to my good friend from Kansas.